Okay, so tonight we are going to start a series on a book that has been written by Rebecca McLaughlin. McLaughlin, sorry. She is a British writer and speaker, but she's written some good apologetic books over the last 3 to 4 years. I think she spoke in Columbus this summer at an institute, a local church institute that I taught at before. But anyway, I didn't go, but I know she was here. But she wrote a little short booklet called The Secular Creed. It came out, and it's kind of a short booklet to talk about some of the contemporary issues out there. And it's pretty good. It's short if you want to get it. I mean, it's not overly extensive, but it's it's a good starting point, I'd say. So we're gonna next few weeks talk about some of these issues. I don't know if I'm going to cover every single topic from the book, but we're definitely going to cover some of them. Now, next week we have a guest. I'm not going to be doing this topic next week. We have Stephen Miller coming on. Stephen Miller has been writing books on near-death experiences, and he has a new book out. We had him on a ways back. He talked about his first book he did, but now he has a newer book out. And he's going to talk more about the research he's done on near-death experiences. So there hasn't been a lot of work written on that topic within the apologetic community. There's been a little bit here and there, but nothing extensive. So he is kind of leading the way. They're trying to get more material out there because I have people who've had near-death experiences. I've had friends, loved ones. Maybe you have too. It seems to be they're very common across all cultures. So we're going to talk about some of those things and whether they're compatible with the Bible, whether they're really from God, or whether they're just flukes or whatever they are. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. So it's not just Bible stuff talking about near-death experiences. It's going to be talking about the data, the scientific literature, and some of the other things that have come out about this issue. So that'll be next week. But tonight we're starting on this topic, the secular creed. So when you say secular, it can take a few different definitions here. It can be defined in a few ways, but it certainly can mean you're talking about someone that doesn't just believe in anything supernatural. They could be someone that strictly believes that we are just material physical beings, or they just believe in the natural realm. There's nothing on the outside of nature, nothing on the outside of nothing transcendent. Sometimes it's defined as somebody might say, I just don't engage in any religious behaviors. I don't identify with the religious community. And, they're really big on separation between church and state. Generally, people are secular. There's a thing called secular humanism, but not everybody that's secular necessarily practices secular humanism. Secular humanism is like a movement itself of people that make secular humanism kind of like their own religion, and they have their own communities, and, they have their own groups, and they're kind of adamant about it. They're pretty clear on what they believe, and they're kind of anti-religious. But just someone could just be secular, just as kind of apathetic about religious things. They don't really care, and they just don't identify with any religious belief or any religious community. It just depends on who you're talking to. It obviously can mean worldly or temporal. Obviously, there's nothing beyond this world. So we're talking about, the secular creed, where, we're mostly talking about people that that partake of some of these beliefs that, don't necessarily maybe are participating in religious background or religious community. They don't have any religious background. They're just not affirming any religious belief. Or some people just don't care one way or the other. But it just depends on who you're talking to. But certainly secularism has always been around. It's all across Europe. It's certainly in the United States. Just depends on who you talk to, obviously. When we saw this sign in a lot of yards, which is still out in some yards, a couple years ago, as I was taking walks in the neighborhood I was living in, then I'd stop and look at it and just kind of just in bewilderment, trying to figure out what half of these things even mean. I mean, they're just so vague. These sayings are so vague, and until you narrow down what the heck they're really saying, it's hard to have a dialogue about it. And I'd be willing to bet many people who put signs in these yards don't even know what they mean by some of these things. Maybe some of them they do, but a lot of them are very vague. So she talks a little bit about this in her book, the book I was talking about, The Secular Creed. I just want to touch on one of them before we get into the main topic tonight, which is love is love. I just want to mention that. That's really kind of vague, as you can imagine. And, it's kind of based on more a subjective view of love. I mean, what is love? You say love is love. The first question is, well, what is love and who defines what love is? But I'm not even sure if they've even thought about it. But, it's really a way of saying that, we should tolerate all views as we affirm all behaviors, all sexual behaviors, and love is love. And you're not loving if you don't affirm this or that. It's a kind of a shorthand way of saying, you've got to affirm everything. And, as she says in her book, McLaughlin, she says, maybe we should ask, who is love? And of course, the answer is God alone. But many times, I'm not saying I'm definitely saying that people have these signs in the yards. I don't even think they know what they mean when they say love is love. I think if you nailed it down, they probably say, well, I mean, we affirm all behaviors as equal and everybody wants to believe what they believe and live and let live. And you got to love people or affirm their behaviors. You don't affirm all behaviors, you're not loving. But, the reality of it is that love cannot define itself. Love needs to be defined by someone or somebody. And obviously we think love is defined by God. Love comes from him and he cannot be anything or anyone other than who he is, right? And so, you can't say in reverse that love is God, right? That doesn't make any sense. And we believe that love comes from a transcendent source. It comes outside ourselves, right? And so that whole saying love is love just makes no sense whatsoever. It's incoherent. Make sure you're all muted, please. I don't want to have to fix my call here to mute you. Okay. Everyone needs to be muted. But anyway, so, and then, these sayings that are out in our culture, like just follow your heart and pursue your authentic self. And if that's how you feel about it, that's all that matters. These are all kind of common sayings in our culture. And all these issues really flow from the same issue, the same number one pressing issue that is underlying all these issues and all issues, really. And as I talked before in a presentation, we've done a whole meeting on truth. It really goes back to, well, this is not the PowerPoint that I wanted. I am sorry. I'm missing a couple slides here and I don't know what happened to them. Anyway, I'll just go ahead and orally tell you. It comes down to the fact that truth either comes from the individual, that basically you define what truth is. It starts with you, the I, or it comes from an outside source. Okay. And if it comes from an outside source, what is the outside source? There's only a few sources outside yourself. I mean, technically, society, I guess, is outside yourself in a way. I mean, that's a collection of individuals, though, starting with the definition of something. But if you're going to make you are the arbitrator of truth and what truth is, then it's going to be based on your human opinion, right? And that's why we have thousands of different opinions on everything. But for us as believers, we believe truth starts with God. He is the starting point for truth. And as I've said before, the biblical way of viewing truth and the most common definition of truth throughout Christian history has been truth, in essence, is conformity to fact, reality, or actuality. So when you make a statement about something, it needs to match reality, right? So if you feel something is true, that doesn't always mean it matches reality, right? I could have feelings or preferences towards something, but that doesn't mean it matches reality. I mean, I could have a feeling that I need to go out this night and just leave my family alone. I'm going to leave them and just drive off to California, live by myself. I have this feeling in my heart. I want to follow my heart. Well, obviously that doesn't match reality. That's not the right thing to do. But, our culture today is really starting with more of a kind of a postmodern view of truth, where the authority is the self, right? You are your own authority. Authority isn't founded in God. God is not the starting point for authority. You are the starting point. You're the one that determines what truth is. Okay. And sometimes it does have to do with culture, because culture is changing all the time, and truth, cultural views of truth change. But we just have a lot of people today who have decided to make truth truth is going to be defined by themselves. So their authority doesn't start from God, and truth doesn't start from the outside. It starts internally on the inside. It starts with their own subjective feelings, their own personal preferences, right? And that's the problem we have. And so that's why we have so much disagreement over many beliefs, many positions about things, right? And this isn't going away. So, it's like Natasha Crane said in her book, Faithfully Different. She said, secularism isn't neutral. It's a worldview based on some very specific assumptions. Feelings are the ultimate guide. Happiness is the ultimate goal, and judging is the ultimate sin, and God is the ultimate guess. And so we have a lot of people that think if they feel a certain way or feel about a certain position, that makes it true, and that's their reality, and their subjective view of truth defines everything. So that's a real problem, and that's where we're at. And that's why we all these issues we have today are a result of not agreeing what truth is and where it comes from. Okay. So that's really the underlying problem with a lot of these issues, is the issue of truth. Now, I mentioned a few weeks back, or maybe a month back, I did that strongholds presentation that, Paul talks about this, how there are definitely certain mindsets and strongholds in people's minds. And I talked about the context and in the whole whole book of 2 Corinthians was, people that were false apostles. They were challenging Paul and his authority. They were misleading people in their teaching. And then Paul talked about tearing down arguments, these weapons of our warfare, not human weapons. And then he talked about tearing down arguments, and we tear down arguments, as he said, we take our thoughts captive before Jesus, and we also are ready to tear down arguments with better arguments. We have to try to combat bad thinking with good thinking. And we don't just put our heads in the sand and just say, I'll just pray. That's not the way you combat bad arguments. You have to take them head on. Okay. And you have to expose them. Okay. And it's a spiritual battle, no doubt about it. And we need the Holy Spirit's help. But for us to sit back, and just say, well, whatever. I mean, God will take care of that. And I don't want to say anything. I don't want to get involved. It's whatever. People are lost. Well, the people are on the front lines fighting these battles. They need a lot of prayer, and they need a lot of strength. They need a lot of support. They need a lot of encouragement, because these are real spiritual battles that are going on across our country, across the world. People's mindsets, these strongholds in their thinking. And sometimes we just sit back. We let people fight those battles for us. We just say, well, so-and-so is doing it. They're dealing with the issue of transgenderism. They're dealing with the issue of abortion. They're dealing with the issue of homosexuality. They're dealing with the issue of this issue or that issue or that issue. And we just, kind of benefit from their fights. The fights that they're having out there in the public square. I mean, fights mean they're fighting against these strongholds from going further. And that's okay if you want to, support them and encourage them. But just remember that, wherever you are, you're called to do the same thing. You're called to tear down strongholds and tear down arguments. Okay. So if you get a little more equipped, then you might be able to, partake of some of these discussions with people out there that are lost. Right. Now, as far as the creed and what Rebecca talks about in this book, she has different topics she's doing. She talks about racism. She talks about transgenderism. She talks about homosexuality, talks about abortion. But tonight we're going to pick one, and we're going to kind of stay in that area. We can't go over all the issues in her book tonight. We're going to stay in one, and I'm going to do I have talked about this before, but this one's a little more extensive. We are going to talk about the transgenderism issue tonight. It's definitely an issue, and it's something I've become kind of passionate about. Read a lot of books on it, done a lot of research. I don't know everything, but it's something that is certainly an issue. And this look at this stat right here. The number of minors in America receiving a diagnosis of gender dysphoria tripled from 2017 to 2021, with more than 42,000 receiving the diagnosis in 2021. On the popular social media platform TikTok, trans has logged 50.2 billion views as of this writing when she wrote that book, which is a couple years ago, having nearly doubled within the last year. And it is true, a lot of people are just going on TikTok and other social media platforms and looking up transgender videos, and you get a lot of popularity. You get a lot of people encouraging you, affirming you, saying you're brave if you become trans. It's an identity thing, and people are getting all the affirmation they ever needed by going on these platforms if they're not getting it at home or in other places. So it is true that TikTok is a real problem for this, and some other social media platforms. I'll talk more about this. And it is a social contagion. There's been more than enough resources written on this. Just some books here I would suggest. You can certainly read more. I don't agree with all the authors in these books. Some of them I agree more with others than others. It just depends on, which one you're reading. There's even more books than this. These are just only a few. But they're all Carl Trueman's book. If you want to see where we got to today, why we're at where we got to, as far as with transgenderism, the sexual issues, it all started a long time ago. And Carl Trueman talks about that in his two books there on the right. He traces the history of it, especially the rise and triumph of the modern self, because that's what it is. We have expressive individualism today, where people are just saying, this is my authentic self, get out of the way, this is my happiness, it's what I want to do, and I feel this way, and if you don't agree, you need to affirm everything I do. And people think we need to affirm all behaviors, and if you don't affirm all behaviors, you're intolerant, you're mean, and you're not loving. So, of course, that's just complete nonsense, but that's what sometimes is being pushed in our culture, okay? All right. This is a really good book, Abigail Schreier's book, The Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, because it is true that a lot of transgenderism today is impacting teenage daughters or teenage girls. It used to be more male, but it has shifted mostly to young females now. Target banned that book. You can still get it, but it was banned by Target. What a shock. I mean, who cares? Target sells transgender clothing now. And then we had Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally, and that got banned by Amazon. So obviously there's pushback. There's no doubt that's going to happen. That's nothing new there. So let's talk a little about the culture and political issues with this issue, with the transgenderism issue. Can we hide from the transgender revolution? Not really. So we kind of have a pastoral task and a political task. Both are important. And obviously, as children of God, some of us will be able to engage in one or the other more than the other. Some of us will just be lay people who are trying to learn about this topic so we can engage people around it. So you don't have to take it on as a full-time job or be a politician fighting for legislation, whatever that is necessarily. But we have a responsibility to be informed. And it is churches' responsibility to inform their congregants. So if your congregants or your congregation will not discuss transgenderism or any hot topic issue, they're just doing you a huge disfavor. So they're afraid, or maybe they don't know how to talk about it. Maybe they haven't looked into it, but they cannot ignore these topics forever. So all these issues that she talks about in this book, especially this one. So my church right now I'm going to, they did a 4-week class on it. I know that the pastor is going to do a series on this. He's about to hit this topic in a couple of weeks. So we've been talking about it, because he says he gets emails all the time about it. So, people are talking about this issue. It's out there in the culture. It's impacting their kids. It's everywhere. And remember, like Nancy Pearcey wrote a book called Total Truth. She's a female apologist. And, she said that kind of theme of this book is that, which I have right here. Look on my shelf. Put it on the stack. Sorry. But she said that, Christians want to maintain the credibility of the gospel. They need to understand that what they say about all reality matters. It isn't just me and Jesus going to heaven. Like, that's all that matters. Get me saved so I can go to heaven when I die. That's kind of a very reduced gospel. It's kind of reduced down to a single issue like the afterlife. Okay. She's saying that actually Christianity is a worldview. It's a way we view reality, and that should speak to all of reality, right? So we need to think that way, okay? Now, when you get this issue with transgenderism, there's, of course, issues of anthropology and philosophy. There's issues of what is a human, what are we made of? Are we just globs of matter? Philosophy is a huge issue in the debate. There's issues of language, like who gets to define the terms being used. There's also theological issues for sure. And then politically, there's issues of public policy, of course. What kind of policies will we pass to deal with this issue? That's why voting is important, because when we vote for certain people, they pass legislation that impacts people's lives, right? So, I've done the politics and worldview integration talk before, that you can't just pull out of politics and just say, preach the gospel. That's all that matters, just preach the gospel. Well, okay, yeah, preach the gospel, but at the end of the day, it is true that whoever gets in office gets to pass legislation that's going to impact your life, your kids' lives, and how, what you can do and can't do at certain times. So you can't really separate the two. Obviously, politics has its limitations, as I've talked about, but you can't completely pull out. And then some people, as I've talked about before, put too much hope in politics. They put all their stock into politics, and that's why they get frustrated every election, because they're viewing a political party as saving the country or fixing all the issues, and it's just not going to happen. And then, of course, there's moral issues involved. Definitely more morality, a lot of moral issues, and ethics is involved in this debate. One thing we don't want to do is fall into the same trap of what a lot of people in the transgender movement are doing, and that's by making this huge separation between the mind and the rest of the body, between your psychology and your biology. Because if you look back to one of the heresies the Christians had to deal with, which was Gnosticism, they believe that actually matter, could be the physical universe, or the human body is just evil. And they thought Jesus being God in the flesh was evil, because there's no way God would take on a human body, because the body is just evil. So they didn't buy into the incarnation. Paul talks a lot about this a little bit in the background of Colossians, when he's writing to the believers at Colossae. He's dealing with this heresy. So sometimes what Gnostics believe, or they would believe, salvation is more escape from the body, from the bondage of the body. The body's bad, and I need to get the most important thing about me, which is my soul, out of here. And it was kind of escape from material existence. Okay. So it's certainly, we don't want to fall into that trap. And, as C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity, he said Christianity is almost the only one of the great religions which thoroughly approves of the body, which believes that matter is good, that God himself once took on a human body. Correct. Jesus took on a human body. And then Nancy Pearcey wrote her book, Love Thy Body. That was another book she wrote, Nancy Pearcey, the female apologist, and she talked about how in the transgender debate is that what's happening is people are saying the real you is separate from your bodies. The real you says that you don't match your biology. The real you tells you your psychology is separate from your biology. The real you has these feelings, and that overtakes the rest of your body, right? They make a huge separation between the two, but that's not what Christians believe. We always have held to some kind of dualism. There's different kinds of dualisms. I don't have time to go over the different dualisms, but I generally hold to what's called a holistic dualism, that says that humans are created by God as integral wholes, single beings with different dimensions, body, mind, and soul, that cannot be just separated into different parts. They're all unified, but they certainly, we believe the soul can separate from the body when we can have disembodiment when we die temporarily till we get a resurrection body. But we certainly don't make this huge distinction. Like, we don't say, well, my psychology's here, my body's here, and those are two separate things. And, my psychology is more important than my biology, and my body's more important than my mind. My mind's more important than my body. No, it all goes together as one package. Okay. That's why if you're not well psychologically, you won't be well in other areas of your life. If you're not well spiritually, you won't be well in other areas. If you're not well physically, you might not be well mentally. It's all integrated. Okay. So, you know, we know that social media has really pushed transgenderism to the limit. We've had more than enough people out there with their, you know, platforms or whatever, advertising what they want to do. We know about the Leah Thomas story, who's now being sued by Riley Gaines, from what I believe. But, you know, we have seen people, you know, if you ever saw the movie Inception, which I love that movie, by the way, it was a great movie, came out years ago. I mean, I should say it was entertaining. I mean, it's not like a Christian movie or anything, but I thought it was just well done. And in that movie was a really good actress. Her name was Ellen Page. And she was a very gifted actress, but she decided to become trans. And now she's transitioned into a male, as you can see. What she's done to herself. She's mutilated her body. And that's tragic, but that's what's happened in a lot of cases. And then, of course, we had the Dylan Mulvaney going out there and making millions or thousands of dollars off his transgenderism. It's a he. And, you know, we know that he advertised for Bud Light and some other companies and paid the price. A lot of those companies went downhill after that. But he's a big star, you know, on TikTok, and he's got a following. President Biden had him visit the White House. There he is, dressed as a girl. So there we are, just President and Dylan having a conversation there. And then we have the fact sheet of our current administration on equality and visibility for transgender Americans. And of course, they are absolutely 100% pro-transgenderism, 100% pro-equality, and saying that everyone's equal, everyone's entitled to transition, do whatever they want. And of course, they absolutely embody follow your own heart, follow your own desires, do what you want. It's your body. Do what you want. It's your choice, and we'll support you in it. So we know that our current administration is advancing this beyond anything that's ever been before. And then we had Bill Maher, who's not exactly been known as the most conservative commentator, but he has a heck of a lot of common sense. And he said that transgenderism is kind of trendy. You know, it's a trendy thing. And, you know, it's a way to get attention. He thinks it's kind of ludicrous. So he got a lot of criticism for that. So we also have someone in the current administration, of course, that is trans. There he was, there he is. Now he identifies as Rachel Levine. But anyway, and then we had this guy who got kicked out of the administration for stealing luggage. He was the waste disposition. He was assistant secretary of spent fuel and waste disposition in the Office of Nuclear Energy, but he's gone now. He got fired. But anyway, so Tumblr currently lists 114 different gender options. And I think they've shown that the current many Gen Zs and Gen Ys, many millennials, Gen Y, and post-millennials, Gen Z, born after 1984, have been dubbed the gender fluid generation. So it's quite trendy with that age group, in some cases. If you've ever seen the What is a Woman documentary, I highly recommend it. Matt Walsh did that. You can go watch it. I've seen it. It's quite amusing and very entertaining and also well done. So I just recommend it if you haven't seen it. Okay, just want to mention also that when you get into the culture and people trying to get the transgender message into schools and out there into the culture, there's really some entry points that they try to do it. And this is through what we call activism. Not everybody who is trans is an activist. I just want to say that. Not everybody who is transgender is into activism. Okay, these are the activists, you know, that they want to change thinking about it. You know, they get into the school systems, they put it in the books, they teach it, you know, they try to change thinking about binary, thinking about sex. They try to create a counter narrative. Of course, they use, you know, books, media plans, lessons plans, curriculum. They try to do it institutionally by adopting transgender policies in private spaces like bathrooms and locker rooms, as we know. And we obviously know there's a lot of stories, if you haven't heard, a lot of school boards are having problems with parents. Parents are pushing back. In California, where they've now passed a law saying that I believe it's minors don't have to inform their parents if they want to transition, become a different gender. I believe the state of California sued a California school there because the California school wanted the parents to be informed that their child was becoming trans. And so because that school decided to inform parents, the state sued the school. So quite interesting, isn't it? So yeah, there's a whole agenda, to get it out there, to change thinking, and to obviously start in the schools and start really young. So this woman right here, Joanna Olson Kennedy, she said that she hadn't seen any problem with removing the breasts of a 13-year-old wrestling with their gender, since adolescents usually actually have the capacity to make a reasoned, logical decision that is beyond idiotic. And she says, if you want breasts at a later point in life, you can go get them. No, that's not necessarily true. So that is very tragic. She's medical director of the Center for Trans Youth Health and Development, attending physicians. So there you go. Educated people are not always smart. And then there's been a lot of stories that have come out, of course, about detransitioners, people that have gone through the surgery, they transitioned and they regretted it. And now they've got a real problem with their bodies. And there's a lot of stories out, more stories coming out. I imagine this is going to be happening more and more, and we're hoping that this will get people's attention to see that the transgender narrative is not working. And I think more of these stories you'll be seeing more and more. We know that this girl here, she testified in Congress about what happened to her. She's absolutely infuriated that her parents went through with it with the doctors and she wasn't told so many things. So Chloe, you can find her stuff online. The question is, should we base all our views off transgenderism, off these testimonies? Probably not, but they certainly need to be heard, and they certainly provide a lot of support to the narrative that this transgenderism thing is not the wise idea, is not the best interest of somebody to go through, or as far as transitioning, right? So you can find a lot of these stories. There was this woman here that, she was working at a transgender clinic, and she said it was just wrong. She finally kind of blew the whistle that this is not right. It's morally wrong about what happened there, as far as, these kids that are going through transgenderism surgery. She thinks they're too young. She thinks it's got a problem. I think she's like a lesbian or something. I don't think she's any kind of conservative Christian, but she just says it's wrong what's happening. She got a lot of flack for that, obviously. Now, according to the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute, this was back in June 2022, it said that nearly 1 in 5 people who identify as transgender are ages 13 to 17. And the percentage and number of adults who identify as transgender in the U.S. have remained steady over time. And the estimate of the number of the youth who identify as transgender has doubled from our previous estimate. And so, like I said, a lot of this is due to social media, people finding stuff on TikTok, information on TikTok and elsewhere. Yeah, we have issues where people are being sued or else disciplined for not using proper pronouns, being punished for not using students' preferred pronouns. I like what my friend Greg Kokel says about this. He's a Christian apologist. He said if people ask you about what pronoun are you, he says just say I have a biological sex. Can't you tell what I am? I'm a male. So he said, don't give into that language. Don't even start using it. Like if they ask you what your preferred pronoun is, just don't even give into that, because then you're going to be contributing to the problem. So he says that the best thing to do is just say, well, I'm obviously, if you look at me, I'm a biological male. That's all I'm going to say. So he won't give him an answer like use he or him. He won't say that. So anyway, that's another topic. If you're in Canada, it's really bad there. I know that there's parents who lost appeal for custody of a teen identifying as transgender. They can't assess gender identity with their own child. So how'd you like to live in Canada and have to deal with that? So that's pretty scary when your own child wants to transition and you can't have absolutely no say in it as a parent. So that is pretty bad. Let me look at a few terms here and definitions, if you don't mind. Let me just talk about sex for a minute. The word sex, can be used in two senses. Obviously, it can refer to the biological category of a male or female. If I say I'm a male, obviously that's my sex. Or of course, it can refer to sexual intercourse. But generally, we're talking about this issue. Let me go back here. I'm sorry. So when we say non-binary, that means that people think that gender identities are not exclusively male or female or masculine or feminine. They don't think gender is binary, right? A binary is something that has two options, male or female. So people identify as non-binary feel that these binary categories don't reflect their experience of gender. Okay, that's what non-binary means. And that's what most college campuses are teaching, that gender's not binary, it's non-binary. Okay, they're trying to teach that in the schools too. Now, as Carl Trueman says, in his book Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, sex and gender used to be synonyms for each other. In the Bible, it's pretty much assumed they're synonyms for each other. They don't walk around in the Bible like the people in those time periods going, oh, what's your gender? Oh, well, what's your sex? Oh, I don't know. Let's confuse the two. No, they were pretty much synonymous with each other. And that's the way it was for a long time. But ever since the 1960s and the sexual revolution and things, they've been used to kind of been split apart, really. Sex over here and gender's over here, which is a mistake. Most biological textbooks will tell you a person is biologically either male or female based on four things: presence or absence of a Y chromosome, internal reproductive organs, external sexual anatomy, or endocrine systems that produce secondary sex characteristics. Okay. And the American Psychological Association says that sex refers to the biological status and is typically categorized as male, female, or intersex. We'll talk about intersex in a second. There are a number of indicators of biological sex, including sex chromosomes, gonads, internal reproductive organs, and external genitalia. Not much of a debate there. So when we talk about like sex and gender, sex, of course, is a biological and bodily reality. Gender can be a social expression of that physical reality, and generally it is. That's why generally, if you're whatever your biology is, generally your gender expression or the way you express yourself is a reflection of your biology, right? Now, it is true that what's happening today is that gender is being separated from body reality, right? They're two separate things, and it could be anything you want it to be. You can, you could have a guy that's a biological male. I see most of all the transgender students I see at Ohio State campus are all males wanting to be females. I'm sure there's some females there that want to be males, but I see a heck of a lot of guys wearing dresses and dressing like women. I see it more and more than I used to. So a lot of times I don't know whether they've transitioned or not. I don't know if they've gone through the whole transition, but they're expressing themselves as a different gender than what their biological sex is, okay? But that's what's been happening. And part of this is due, of course, to the impact of postmodernism, because in postmodern thinking, everything's a social construct. You can take the language and redefine things. They can change reality with language, even though it doesn't reflect biological reality or reflect reality what it is, or what reality is. They just take language and can just change the whole thing by just with the language alone. So with their terminology, the sex which a person identifies is that person's sex, regardless of their innate physical characteristics. So, that becomes a challenge. So postmodernism is a big problem and a big reason why we're at where we're at. A lot of redefinition of language and terms. But gender identity is really now described as a psychological aspect associated with being male or female, or one's internal sense of self as male, female, both, or neither. Gender roles have to do with how males and females are expected to act in any given culture. But like I said, what's happening today is they've made a dichotomy between the psychology and the biology. So it's a psychological issue they're dealing with, and they choose to treat it by changing their body. So they choose to treat a mental problem by mutilating their body. And that's obviously not the way to go, but that's what happens when you make a split between your psychology and your biology. It's very sad. You know, some people like to use the term cisgender. Like if someone asks me if I'm cisgender, I won't fall into that trap. They'll say, "Oh, are you cisgender?" I'm like, no, I'm not going to answer that. I'm like, I'm just saying I'm a man, a biological male. That's all I'm going to say. So, you know, that whole terminology is just a gameplay, or trying to play games with language. And I'm not really going to play into that, but they like to use that term cisgender a lot. Transgender is a person whose gender identity does not correspond to that person's biological sex. I don't even believe necessarily it's assigned at birth, but it's it's like you don't assign someone if someone physically comes out as a male or female at birth, if you look at their genitalia, you know what they are. So obviously it's wrong to say a doctor then looks at their genitalia and then comes up with his own assignment of what their sex is. You know what I mean? Like he could just make it up or change it. I mean, physically it's defined right at birth, you know? So when we get to gender confirmation surgery and sex reassignment surgery, though, you get into all kinds of issues, like these horrific things, you know, double mastectomies, you know, all these things that are really, really harmful. And that's where we get into problems. And so, you know, the problem is, just keep this in mind, you know, if you're talking with someone about transgenderism and they say, well, you know, I think gender's fluid, it's not binary, you know, it's not male and female, it can be many things, it's your reality, it's whatever you think it is, and it's the way I feel to identify as, and we don't really know for sure what gender is. It's certainly not male and female, it's not binary. Do you know that makes no sense whatsoever? Because if you have somebody that wants to transition into being a male or female, let's say I'm a male and I want to become a female, I know what a female is. I know their genders are fixed. I know there's two fixed genders. They have to be binary. Otherwise, you couldn't transition to one or the other, right? How would you know you want to be a male if you don't know what a male is? How would you know you want to be a female if you don't know what a female is? Right? So the whole thing just is so ridiculous. It's convoluted. Okay, to say we don't know what gender is, but I want to be a male. Wait, I thought you don't know what a male is. I want to be a female. Oh, wait, I thought you don't know what a female is. It doesn't make any sense, right? Of course you know what it is. That's why you transition to being a male or female. So, so today, what they're asking people, they're going to ask you if you're affirming. So if you affirm transgenderism, they want you to be affirming. You know, do you affirm transgenderism? They think it's fine. You affirm, what you're doing is you're affirming their gender, even if it doesn't match their biological sex. Non-affirming, which I hold to, and most of us, I think, on this call hold to, says that transgender and other expressions of gender variance are a sinful choice due to the results of disorder or brokenness or results from the fall. Yes, it's part from the fallout of the fall of man, to talk more about. So when you get in this topic of like gender dysphoria, that means that people have this psychological inner feeling that's a problem. They're unhappy with their biological sex. They're unhappy, like they say, I'm trapped in the wrong body. That can be a very strong feeling and persistent over time. We need to be sympathetic with people that go through that, because it is a real issue. The 5th edition of Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 2013 says Gender dysphoria refers to the distress of what may accompany their incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and one's assigned gender. So, like I said, they're having a problem psychologically matching up with what their biology is. Okay. And that creates some serious conflict psychologically, right? So that does happen. But, in 2018, the World Health Organization ruled that gender incongruence could be classified or would be classified under sexual health issues rather than mental disorders. So it used to be viewed as a mental disorder. Now it's viewed as normal. So they think it's an identity to be celebrated now. Like if you have gender dysphoria, it's fine. You're fine. It's part of your identity. It's okay. There's nothing mentally wrong with it. So they shifted on that issue. They think it's a big victory when Transgender Europe announced this is the result of tremendous effort by the trans and gender diverse activists from around the world. Gender incongruence is now regarded as an identity to be celebrated. So that has shifted from what it used to be. Now, it is true that statistically, most people outgrow gender dysphoria by age 18. So, people say to you, well, I've got a 13-year-old that's struggling with gender dysphoria. And then they tell their parents that you need to get them transitioned as soon as possible because you're going to lose them as children. You're just going to lose them because they're going to leave you and not want you to be their parents because they want to transition to being they want to be a male when they're a female or vice versa. Then what they do is they manipulate parents into believing that, when what the parents should be told is that most kids outgrow gender dysphoria by age 18. So they don't get them a chance to just pull back and say, yeah, I'm going to wait it out. I'm going to see what happens with my child. I think they're going to outgrow this. So I'm not just going to let them run off and mutilate their body at age 14, 15, 16, or even younger than that. But sadly, the doctors are telling them the wrong thing. So, some people say that, one objection is that brain science shows that the brain that functions as one gender while the rest of the body is biologically the other gender. There's not a lot of conclusive evidence for this. We believe as Christians, at least I do, that whether it's genetic, hormonal, psychological, physiological, or a spiritual cause, it can be overcome and healed through faith in the Messiah and continued reliance on the power of the Holy Spirit. So when you're dealing with people who have gender dysphoria, we have to be compassionate, but the answer is you don't treat a psychological problem with a physical, by mutilating your body. That's not, you get them spiritual help, you get them psychological help, but you don't just suddenly just say, well, I've got a mismatch between my psychology and my biology. I'm going to go ahead and just allow them to mutilate their body and do that. That is just insanity, but that's what they're doing today. Some have said that the cause of gender dysphoria may be environmental factors, genetic factors, issues with upbringing and nurture of a child. They have shown a lot of trans people have been very impacted by their past, the way they were raised, some issue with their upbringing. That can happen, obviously. The biblical response is it's a fallout, like I said, from the impact of the fall of man, that when sin entered in the world, it certainly caused damage psychologically, physiologically, psychologically, and of course, physiologically with our bodies. So the fall of man impacted our whole being. Okay. No doubt about that. So it is true that we do need to listen to people when they're having this problem. You don't want to bang them over the head with the bomb and say, you're in sin and that's it. You need to repent. We first need to probably just listen to them, hear what they're saying, but we don't want to fall into what we call standpoint epistemology, where that's where like authority is in the person's own experience, where their personal experience is the final authority over everything. That there's no other authority like this, and this is my experience, and that's the way it is, and there's no way around it, and it can't be fixed, and this is what happened. That's not quite going to work, because you need to take in other things such as facts and objective criteria, right? You can't just totally live your whole life based on your own personal experience as an authority. Okay, your own personal experience as the authority. Once again, it's kind of back to truth, starting with you, that you are the sole arbitrator of truth. Now, like I said, some people may have had very horrific backgrounds, horrific family experiences, and we need to listen to them. They need compassion. We need to speak to them with love, but we definitely need to realize there's other things that need to be taken into account here, right? Not just their own lived experience. Lisa Litterman, she's the one that's done a lot of research on this topic. She looked at what's called rapid onset gender dysphoria, where these kids come along and they certainly say they're trans really quickly. Like this just appeared out of nowhere. Like your kid comes home one day and says, I'm trans, or, just really out of left field all of a sudden when your child comes home and they tell their parents, and it really is confusing to their parents, like, what the heck happened? Where did this come from? And she says that when she surveyed 256 parents who have kids, 83% of whom are male or female, I'm sorry, a lot of them seem to fit this description of the rapid onset gender dysphoria. It comes on very quickly. And she says a lot of their new identity just comes out of nowhere. And the common theme is that they've engaged in a lot of heavy online and social media activity surrounding their coming out. Generally, that's always the case. Also, many of them already had mental issues that weren't being dealt with. Okay. Now, Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, she was she's an investigative journalist. I don't think she's even a Christian. I think she's like she might be Jewish. I don't know. I don't think she's overly religious or anything. But she talks about the harm it's doing to teenage daughters or teenage girls. And back to Lisa Litterman back here, this woman, Littman, some criticized it, calling it transphobic, hateful, and harmful to trans kids, naturally. Another critique was that Littman surveyed parents and not the kids. Think of that. She actually surveyed parents. How wrong could that possibly be? Well, awful. But she's responded to that. She's faced the criticisms and responded, of course. Okay, what about intersex people? A lot of times people who advocate transgenderism think because there's a very, 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 very small minority of people that are born intersex, that maybe that is justification for transgenderism. And that is where some people are born and the external genitalia may be ambiguous, obviously. They compromise fewer than one of every 5,000 births. And there has to be a choice, whether to bring the child up as a boy or girl. Then as time passes, puberty takes place, and obviously their true sex becomes more apparent. Not really a lot of can't get a lot of justification out of that just to take a small sample of intersex people and assume that means that people can go ahead and mutilate their bodies and treat a psychological problem by mutilating their bodies. That's really not a good argument at all. There was a person that brought up this to Frank Turk in a presentation called "What's the Worst Argument for Transgender Theory?" They brought up the intersex issue, and they got up and she said, "I'm a biologist. Are you a biologist?" And she acted like intersex was the game changer. If a person's intersex, that's an argument for transgenderism. And there was a response to that. You can get the video, "What's the Worst Argument Transgender Theory?" on that YouTube clip there. Just look it up. You can watch how they responded to this questioner. But they tried to use that a lot, the intersex argument, that question and answer time with Frank at a presentation he was doing somewhere. So you can watch it online. There's no doubt the entire clash over the transgenderism issue has to do with a clash of worldviews. I think that, if we don't know who we are, we don't know where we come from, we don't know what we are, we don't have an identity, no doubt about it. And really, from our perspective, our worldview, we ask like what kind of beings we are, where do we come from, what value or worth do we have, and how should we be treated? It goes back to the issue of what we are as humans. And one worldview says that humans are strictly physical, material beings, right? Spirits and souls don't exist. And we are, in essence, just biological organisms here to survive, right? And so we are free to do whatever we want. We define ourselves, and we are the sole arbitrators of truth. And if God doesn't exist, this would be your worldview. You are the starting point of all reality. You are the one who defines truth, and everything goes back to you. You are your own authority. So, these people believe that purposeless evolution has cast you up along the human race, and you're just an accident of nature. So if you believe that, I assume that you have the free reign to call the shots on everything, including your own gender. Obviously, if you want to mutilate your body and everything, it's your choice because you're your own sole arbitrator of everything. And that's sad because that really falls into the postmodernist anthropology. So in postmodernism anthropology, meaning what is a human, that means human nature can be defined independently of us. Cannot be defined independently of us. We are the sole arbitrators, right? We're free to define what it means to be human, whether individually, collectively, and human nature will be relative, fluid, and ultimately up for grabs, right? So a lot of postmodernism feeding into that. So the other thing is that when we think of these terms, what we believe in, at least I believe in, generally the Christian view, is what we call gender essentialism. And that's the belief that gender is inborn, biologically determined, and immutable. It can't be changed. You can change, remember, you can change your appearance, but you can't change your biology. Okay, if you want to mutilate your body on the outside, cut off your private parts and cut off this, cut off that, you can change your appearance, but you cannot change your biology. That's immutable. Okay. And of course, most transgender activists hate gender essentialism. And they generally hold to what's called gender nominalism. They think gender is socially constructed. So that gets a little bit into philosophy there. Biological essentialism is the belief that a person's gender is determined by the objective fact of their biological sex. Where there's a felt mismatch, subjectivity should be helped out, yield to objectivity. So the mismatch in your mind should be yielded over to your biology. You don't, like I say, you don't just split them apart, right? But what's transgenderism, the activists do, is they hold to what's called psychological, there's what's called psychological essentialism, where transgender activists usually hold to this, where they basically said the objectivity side of things should actually yield over to their person's subjective perception of their gender. Basically, your psychology is the most important thing, right? That's the most essential thing. So like I said, in our worldview, we don't split those two apart, right? We keep them together. The mind and the body are all one package. We don't make this sharp dichotomy between the two, and we don't pit them against each other. And we definitely don't let one rule over each other. They go together holistically. Okay, but that's not what's happening in the transgender debate. Your psychology doesn't change your ontology. Ontology is a study of reality. And, if God made men and women fundamentally and comprehensively different, then the idea that a man could ever become a woman is simply impossible. Your feelings cannot change your being. Okay, your psychology doesn't change your ontology. So our response to this is, first of all, obviously we have different starting points. If we are not the sole arbitrators of truth, and God is the starting point, he's our authority. We believe miracles are possible and actual, and he has shown up in history through the person of Jesus, and the Bible reveals what God wants for humanity. So we have different authorities, a different starting point on authorities. And as my pastor said yesterday in the church I was in, he gave a sermon on, he was talking about authority, and he challenged the Christians in the church. He said 2 questions. Is Jesus really your authority? Is he really your authority? Or do you just pay lip service to him like, yeah, he's my savior, he takes me to heaven when I die? But is he your authority of all of life? Is he really your authority? And is the Bible an authority to you? Have you actually put yourself under the authority of the Bible? Or do you just listen to sermons each week and go, yeah, good sermon, yeah? Or do you actually look at the text that God is speaking you through the text and put yourself under that authority, make a commitment to do what the text says? Otherwise, you're just passive listening to sermons. You're not actively listening. Okay? Yes, that was a good challenge. If someone experiences incongruence, if they have a problem between their biological sex and their gender, which one determines who they are and why? Of course, the Bible doesn't necessarily answer this question, because the people in the Bible just believe sex and gender are all one package. They weren't really struggling with that. You can't find any verse that says, if your gender identity does not match your biological sex and thy body is who you really are. It doesn't say that, but it's assumed that your sex and gender, they stay together. We don't make a dichotomy between the two. And obviously, when you read the beginning of Genesis, the categories of male and female in Genesis 1 describe biological sex, not gender identity or gender roles. No doubt about it. When the author writes, let us make man in our image after our likeness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And God created man in his image, the image of God who created him, male and female, he created them. Well, obviously that is showing a gender binary, male and female, man and woman, right? Then he says, be fruitful and multiply. And obviously the command to reproduce would make a lot of sense if male and female were just only highlighting gender identity or gender roles, obviously. Okay. Remember Jesus in the debate with the Pharisees, he cites Genesis 1:27 and 2:24 to reiterate the creation account's perspective on sex embodiment. We are sexually embodied beings. He said, haven't you read? He replied, at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united with his wife, the two will become one flesh. So Jesus considers God's original creation of humans as male and female to be normative thousands of years later, way after Genesis was written, of course. As I did another teaching, if Jesus is God, if he rose from the dead, he is an authority. We have to listen to what he says, and that's what he teaches. Now, if you don't believe he rose from the dead, you don't think he's an authority, you won't care. But if you're going to profess him as your Lord and Savior, then you're going to listen to what he says. But, if you're going to have Christians sitting in churches saying, well, I don't know, I don't think he really meant that. And yes, there's passages. I know we have to interpret them and do our Bible hermeneutics, but still, if you're going to start, picking and choosing certain parts of scripture, what is authoritative and what's not authoritative, then that gets kind of tricky. Yes, there's that passage in Deuteronomy 22:5 about cross-dressing is an abomination. I don't recommend using that, because if you're going to do that with somebody, then they're going to start asking you questions about all the passages in the Torah, all the other Levitical laws that are not prescriptive for today. We do not use a lot of those laws today. So if you're going to apply that one today, what about all the other laws? Okay. You can do it, but just remember, you're going to start answering a lot of other questions about passages in the Torah. So just be ready. Okay. 1 Corinthians 6:9-10. Robert Gagnon, who is one of the premier scholars on sexuality, he says that Paul includes soft men in the offender list in 1 Corinthians 6:9 and 10, which in context designates men who attempt to become women through dress, mannerisms, makeup, and sometimes castration, often to attract sexual partners, male sex partners. And Paul goes on to say there, of course, those people will not inherit the kingdom of God. So desiring to become the opposite sex can affect one's salvation, no doubt about it. You can read that article right there. Go to First Things right there, how Christians should respond to transgender phenomenon. That's just a Bible, talking about the Bible a little bit. You also could just remember that we talk about natural law. I don't know if you guys know what that is. Natural law is something that's drawn from the created order. You don't need the Bible to talk about natural law. It's basically looking at the created order around you, and these principles are already rooted in the fabric of reality, and that is the fact that there's certain things in the natural world that are aimed towards a certain goal. They're just it's built into the creation. What we tend to do in natural law, we might just say, what is natural? If we look at the natural world around us, what is the natural thing to do? And an example might be that if you want to sniff a glue stick, to like get that funky feeling inside of you, is that the intended purpose of a glue stick? No, it's not. The purpose of a glue stick is to glue things, and you know how to use a glue stick with paper and everything. And just like if I try to take my phone and go to fix a door jamb over in the corner of my room, that's not the intended purpose of this phone. The purpose of this phone is to be used to make calls, text, communicate, right? So we start using our body in the way it shouldn't be used, using its proper function or looking at its proper goal and purpose, and we start twisting it and not using our body in the way it was designed, which is clear in the natural world. 2 males cannot create a child. 2 females cannot reproduce as well. That's not the natural function of a body. We just need to realize that, our biological sex is rooted in chromosomal differences that cannot be changed by surgery. And our feelings are a poor indicator of truth. So, like I said, you can change your appearance, but you cannot change your biological sex. You can't change your biological sex. You can't change your chromosomes. Okay? So go ahead and have all the surgery you want, but it's not going to change your biological sex. Okay? And where we're at is the longer we want to make reality conform to what we want rather than what is, we eventually will reap the consequences. And that's what is probably going on today. It is going on today. We live in a post-reality world where people want to make reality conform to what they want. When you are the sole arbitrator of truth and you are the starting point, you are the authority, you will make reality what you want it to be, because you're not adjusting to the reality that has already been set in order by someone other than you, which is God. So you are your own authority. You can try to adjust reality the way you want it to be, but you will reap the consequences. So keep going, and consequences get worse and worse. Okay. So that's about it.